You wanted to deep dive on Narges Mohammadi. And like every hero's journey, we got to start at the beginning, right? To really get her story, we need to rewind back to 1979, kind of a pivotal year for Iran.
Yeah, no doubt. 79, that was the Iranian Revolution.
Yeah.
Total, like, earthquake reshaping the whole country.
Yeah.
We see the Islamic Republic rise up, and with it, this system, they call it a theocracy.
Theocracy. I got to say, that word, it's always sounded kind of, I don't know, a little ominous, not something we see a lot of, at least not where I'm from. Can you break that down for us? Like, what's that look like in Iran?
Basically, picture this. It's like, you know when the line between religious leaders and the government, it just gets all blurry. That's kind of the gist of it, theocracy. In Iran, it meant these religious leaders, they had and still have a huge amount of power. It's everywhere, in the laws, daily life, you name it. So for someone like Mohammadi, right, someone who's sticking their neck out, challenging the way things are, the stakes are really, really high. It's not just politics they're up against. It's this whole system, these deeply held beliefs and, well, authority.
Wow. Yeah, that definitely sets the stage, doesn't it? It's a whole different world, not just speaking your mind freely, let alone fighting for something like women's rights. So how does someone like Mohammadi, how does she even get into this activism thing in the first place?
So even with all those restrictions, or maybe because of them, there's this spirit, right, this resistance that's been bubbling under the surface in Iran for years. And Mohammadi, she jumps right into the thick of it, early 90s, focusing on the stuff that this theocracy, it directly controlled, women's rights, equality, all that. You got to think, when religious law is calling the shots on so much of daily life, it's often women who get hit the hardest.
Makes her dedication even more incredible. But it sounds like she wasn't alone, right? You mentioned she was working with this group, the Defenders of Human Rights Center in Tehran.
Right, exactly. This organization, it was founded by another incredible woman, actually, Shireen Ebadi. It became like a haven for activists, a place where they could challenge all the human rights stuff going on. And Ebadi's story, that's a whole other deep dive. She ends up winning the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. First Muslim woman ever, first Iranian too.
Whoa, okay, so we're talking about some seriously brave women here. And knowing that even the Nobel Prize didn't really protect Ebadi from the regime, it makes Mohammadi's choice to follow that path even more intense. So what were some of the big issues that Mohammadi was taking on?
Oh man, her activism was all over the place. In a good way, of course. I mean, she was tackling the touchiest subjects in Iranian society. Like, she worked directly with the families of political prisoners, fighting for their rights, exposing what they were going through. A lot of it was pretty brutal, to be honest.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. And it's easy to just hear about these things. But she wasn't just observing, she was in the trenches. Were there any causes that she was really fired up about?
Mohammadi, she was really, really passionate about, well, ending the death penalty in Iran. And it's rough because Iran, it's got one of the highest execution rates in the world, which is just, well, yeah. She wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, trying to expose what was wrong with the justice system, the human cost, all of it kind of makes you think, right, Iran having such a high execution rate, why do you think Mohammadi chose to focus on that?
I mean, I can only imagine growing up in a place where that's so common, it must stuck with her to dedicate her life to fighting against it. That says a lot about her. But that kind of commitment, it didn't come without a cost, did it? Yeah, I mean, to put yourself out there like that, knowing what you're up against, it's just, I don't know.
It took guts, no question. And for Mohammadi, those consequences, they weren't hypotheticals.
Yeah.
We're talking 13 arrests, 5 convictions. Ultimately, she's hit with a staggering 31 years in prison plus 154 lashes.
Yeah, that's just the thought of it, to face that kind of punishment for, speaking out, it's just...
And remember, it wasn't just speeches or protests. She was also going after, well, some really dark stuff happening in those prisons. Torture, sexual violence, you name it. She was shining a light on the darkest corners.
Those are incredibly heavy issues, and it's like she just kept going, even with everything stacked against her. Was there a particular event or something that happened that led to all those arrests?
It's interesting, Mohammadi's life, it seemed to intersect with all these major turning points in Iran. But one that really stands out, she's arrested again in 2015.
2015, wow. Okay, there's a lot going on then, both globally and within Iran. What were they even saying she did? What were the charges?
The charges, they were always kind of vague, undermining national security, spreading propaganda, basically anything they could pin on her to silence her dissent.
So even if the charges were, let's say, convenient, the issues she was fighting for were very real, right? I mean, the death penalty, prison conditions, those aren't things they made up.
Exactly. And this is where her story becomes part of something much, much bigger. This movement in Iran, woman, life, freedom.
Right, right. 2022, the protests after Mahsa Amini was killed, those images were everywhere. The whole world was watching.
It was huge. And you got to remember, Amini, she was, arrested by the morality police, all because of her hijab. But it became this lightning rod. It ignited all this frustration, all this pent-up anger, especially among women.
And that chant, woman, life, freedom, it was everywhere. Powerful stuff. What was it like for Mohammadi, though, being stuck in prison while all this is happening?
You imagine, here you are, locked up, and outside there's this whole movement, everything you believe in exploding into the open. But even then, even behind bars, Mohammadi finds a way. She starts organizing, showing solidarity with the protests from the inside.
Man, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. That kind of dedication, even when you're the one facing the consequences, it's humbling,
It really is. And here's the thing. Despite being imprisoned for her activism, get this, Mohammadi, she wins the 2023 Nobel Peace Prize.
Wow. I mean, talk about a slap in the face to the regime, right? It's almost like, I don't know, they couldn't silence her, so the world amplified her voice even louder.
And the timing. It couldn't have been more perfect. The protests are happening, the government's cracking down, and boom, this huge international spotlight on Mohammadi.
Like, you can't ignore this world. You listening. It's one thing to throw someone in jail. It's another when the whole planet is saying, hey, we see what you're doing, and we're not okay with it.
Exactly. And that's what made it so powerful. It wasn't just about Mohammadi anymore. It was about the whole woman life freedom movement.
So I got to ask, how did they even spin that? I mean, their own citizen, someone they've locked up, wins the Nobel Peace Prize. What's their narrative?
Well, the Iranian government, they're kind of predictable in a way. It's always the same song and dance. This is interference. We don't need the outside world meddling in our affairs. You know the drill.
Right, right. But this wasn't just some award. This is the Nobel Prize. You can't just brush that off, can you?
Nope. Not really,
Yeah.
Especially with everyone watching and those protests still simmering. Ignoring it completely, not an option.
So what did they do? How do you justify keeping a Nobel laureate locked up?
Same old story, different day. They double down,
Yeah.
We have our laws, national security, blah, blah, blah. They basically try to make it seem like Mohammadi, even with good intentions, was a threat to, the stability of the Islamic Republic, all that jazz.
So basically, two completely opposite views just colliding head on. So where does that leave Mohammadi's story now?
Well, as of right now, she's still imprisoned. It's a stark reminder that in Iran, this activism thing, it's not a game. There are real consequences. But, and this is the important bit, that Nobel Prize, it echoed big time. Her voice is out there on a global scale, and that's something they can't take back.
It's kind of like even when they try to shut her up, the message still gets out there louder than ever.
Exactly. It really makes you think about the power of, courage. Sticking to your principles, even when it really costs you something. Mohammadi, she's living proof of that.
Yeah. It's heavy stuff, for sure. Makes you wonder about the future, What happens next? For Mohammadi, for this woman life freedom movement, even for Iran as a whole.
Man, if I could predict that, I'd be, I don't know, I wouldn't be here. But seriously, it's complicated. Looking at everything we've got, Iran, it's like this balancing act, right? This tension between the people who want more freedom and those clinging to the old ways, the old power structures.
And Mohammadi being in prison, it kind of symbolizes that whole thing, doesn't it? She's like this embodiment of the people demanding change, and then there's the regime holding on for dear life.
Totally. This back and forth, it's been going on for decades, these bursts of protests, then crackdowns over and over. It's brutal.
So where do we even go from here? Is there any hope for real change? I mean, it's easy to get pessimistic.
True. But there are glimmers, these signs like, look at woman, life, freedom. That showed the world what Iranians are capable of, especially the women, the young people. That courage, that refusal to back down. It's incredible.
Putting it all on the line like that, it's inspiring and more than a little humbling, to be honest.
For sure. And Mohammadi's Nobel Prize, it might not get her out of prison right now, but it shines a light. The world is paying attention, whether they like it or not.
It's like a reminder, right? We all have a part to play in this, supporting each other, even when we're countries apart, speaking up for what's right, especially when it's tough.
100%. And I think that's the question we should all be asking ourselves, How can we help? How do we make those voices heard, hold these regimes accountable? How do we build a world where people like Narges Mohammadi, they're not in prison, they're celebrated?
Big questions, no easy answers. But hey, That's what this deep dive thing is all about, right? Getting us thinking, talking, maybe even doing something about it. Thanks for joining us on this one, folks. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for a better world.